பத்திரிகையாளர் என்றாலே மதிப்பிற்கும் மரியாதைக்கும் உரியவர் என்று சமூகத்திற்கு அவர்கள் அளிக்கும் பங்கின் அடிப்படையில் பொருள் கொள்ளலாம். அவ்வகையில் பத்திரிகை துறை மூலம் சமூக பணி மட்டுமல்லாமல் அத்துறைக்கே நெருக்கடி நேரும் போதெல்லாம் முன்னின்று போராடுபவர், பெருமரியாதைக்கும் பெரு மதிப்பிற்கும் உரியவர் மூத்த பத்திரிகையாளர் திரு ராம் அவர்கள். பத்மபூஷன் என் ராம், former editor-in-chief of the Hindu and Frontline magazine, is a political journalist with literary interests. He has written on a range of social political subjects and specialized in investigative journalism. He is a co-biographer of the great Indian writer R.K. Narayan, whom he knew well. Ram was elected president of the Contemporary India section of the 72nd session of the Indian History Congress in 2011. Honors and awards include the Padma Bhushan for journalism in 1990, the Sri Lanka Ratna in 2005, the Asian Investigative Journalist of the Year Award from the Press Foundation of Asia in 1990, the B.D. Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism in 1989, XLRA's first J.R.D. Tata Award for Business Ethics in 2002, the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism's Alumni Award in 2003, the Rajaram Mohan Rai Award for Contributions to Journalism from the Press Council of India in 2018. மூத்த பத்திரிகையாளரும் பெருமரியாதைக்கும் பெருமதிப்பிற்கும் உரியவரான பத்மபூஷன் திரு ராம் அவர்களை தமிழ்நாடு's contribution to India's development என்னும் தலைப்பில் உரையாற்ற அழைக்கிறோம்.
எல்லாருக்கும் வணக்கம். I am very happy to be part of this celebration of 75 years of independence after a glorious freedom struggle, and I am very happy to have heard two major political leaders belonging to different camps speaking about continuities, commonalities. This is relatively rare in politics in various countries and even in India. But I was very pleased to hear Dr. Hirmavalavan as well as MrMaFoiK-Pandiarajan to speak about important themes. In one case, industrial development, including manufacturing, and the other case, social opportunities through education to reduce inequalities. And I'm also very happy to have heard the Consul General Ambassador Nagendra Prasad speak about certain vibrancy that Indian communities abroad bring to the field. And thank you for this opportunity to San Francisco Bay Area Tamil Manram in partnership with the Consulate General San Francisco. I chose the theme Tamil Nadu's contribution to India's development rather than growth, because development encompasses much wider areas, many other issues than just growth, which is usually identified with GDP growth. It is important, but development, I think, is what we are really concerned about. That's the theme. இது உங்களுடைய logo from your website, and இது ஒரு Tamil Nadu government website. You have this important theme that you can read it yourself, that how do you respond to somebody who doesn't wish you well, who does awful things to you, and this great idea of Thiruvalluvar that make them ashamed, make them bow their heads in shame. That's the only response that really works. I think is a very great idea, and I think that's highlights one of the noble ideas that arose from Tamil Nadu soil, and Thiruvalluvar is believed to have been born in fact, Chennai. I have very few slides. It's not a slideshow. I have a slide presentation in the main, but I wanted to use this information to highlight something that came out recently. Best states of India, it's arguable. Some of the parameters, somebody else may use something else. It's like ranking of universities, where there are significant differences, whether it's in the UK or US or wherever. There are some subjective elements, some incomplete information that go into it, but it is very significant that a major magazine, India Today, which began the exercise of, in the post-reform period, exercise of ranking states, and this to some extent fuel competitiveness among states to get into this. But it is significant that for 4 consecutive years, and this really, brings out the continuities, regardless, through regime changes, political regime changes, that for 4 years in a row, Tamil Nadu has been ranked as the top performing state, the best performing state of all the states in India, all the big states in India. And that I think is very significant. As you know, there's been a major political change, although it's very much within the Gravidian movement itself. And some of these rankings are a bit intriguing. You wonder why, how this is done, but they explain it, the methodology. And overall, Tamil Nadu is best performing. You find, I don't have to go into all these details. There's also another category, most improved, which is also, I think, significant. Bihar here gets that. But it is clear that on the whole, the southern region performs much better than perhaps any other region. When it comes to development and significant contributions from Karnataka, from Andhra Pradesh, from Telangana, and also from Little Pondicherry, the Union Territory of Pondicherry ranks very high when you talk about different facets of development and economy, infrastructure, agriculture, health, education, law and order, etc. And Kerala is is a top performing state. You could argue that it could even be the number 1 state or number 2 state in many respects, except that industrial development is not that strong, because Kerala's social indicators really don't belong to middle income and higher middle income countries. When you talk about life expectancy at birth, low infant mortality, low maternal mortality, literacy, etc. And Dr. Thirumavaluvan has already mentioned those things, or the literacy in particular. And I think there has been some impressive improvements in the field of education, primary and secondary education in the southern states, specifically in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, of course Kerala. And recently there have been press reports and some evidence that because of the improvement in the quality of government schools in the southern states, in quite a few southern states, there's been a shift from the private sector to the public sector in education, to the government sector, and that's a very heartening thing. This is a very recent phenomenon, and I think it's right across the entire southern region. So these are significant things, but there are also other parts of the country which do well. And this is for small states. I thought I'll bring that in, and you'll see that overall the best performing small, they say states, but it has a legislature, union territory, is Pondicherry, Puducherry. So on Sikkim also does pretty well. If you look at the big states, Kerala does very well in health, and you'll see inclusive development. Andhra Pradesh has progressed, tourism, environment, Kerala, and so on. think in respect of cleanliness, there's a great deal to improve in the south as well. And they've introduced something called the happiness index, and Kerala tops the list and Goa for smaller states. And these are some rankings. As I said, some of this is arguable, but it indicates broadly the picture. There could be different rankings as well. This particular slide shows the movement, the progress over time. These rankings change, but what is interesting is that Tamil Nadu is always there in the top 3, 4, 5 at most with respect to best performing state. Kerala is also out there, and so on. Karnataka does well. So the southern region as a whole, I think, has performed pretty well. I have just one more slide, and this, I think, I'd like to draw your attention to it, and I would recommend that you read it. Read it critically if you like. This new book came out this year, published by Cambridge University Press, published abroad as well as in India. It's called The Gravidian Model, Interpreting the Political Economy of Tamil Nadu. Professors Kalayarasan and Vijay Bhaskar. These are the authors, and I just give you an idea of the contents, which there's some overlap between what this webinar has been discussing and these themes: democratizing education, healthcare, industrial development, entrepreneurship, and so on, and this. I just want to draw your attention to this book, and now I'll go off. I'll stop sharing. That's just to give some substance to the claim that Tamil Nadu has done outstandingly well over a long period, particularly in the post-reform period. It was not always the case, and if you read this book, there is impressive data to show that Tamil Nadu, where levels of poverty were very high, has really made a dent on poverty. Tamil Nadu has improved its per capita income quite, if not spectacularly, very impressively. Tamil Nadu has the lowest share of the population working in agriculture, so on. Tamil Nadu, already Dr. Thirumavalavan has highlighted the fact that Tamil Nadu has a very high, by far the highest gross enrollment ratio among major states in India, and so on. Now, what is behind it is the interesting question. And I would start by first celebrating the values of our freedom struggle embodied in our constitution. In particular, starting with the preamble, which reads, "We the people of India, etc., solemnly resolve to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic." Socialist is not taken very seriously now, but it's also very much part of our preamble. But the others are there: secular, democratic, sovereign, secular, democratic. And Tamil Nadu, I think one advantage is it fully shares in these values. We have to be frank and note the fact that these values have come under pressure. Majoritarianism does put pressure on some of these values. I don't want to get into any controversial area here. I'm a political journalist, so I constantly engage in these issues. But on this occasion, we celebrate these values, but we'd be less than honest if we did not recognize the fact that that these values have come under pressure, and we hope that that pressure can be resisted, that the setbacks can be reversed. Majoritarianism has no place in our constitution. It's not there at all. On the contrary, these are the values. And what are they? To secure to all its citizens every citizen in the country, whether you are majority or minority, whatever, linguistic, religious, whatever, this principle is there. And what do we have? What have we pledged to secure to all our citizens, all of us? Justice, social, economic, and political. Nidhi, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Sudhandaram, equality of status and opportunity. Samatvam, and to promote among all fraternity, sagodaratva, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. These have undergone some amendments, but basically they spring from what the Constituent Assembly of India decided over a period of 2.5 years, resulting in the promulgation of our Republican Constitution. I emphasize this because from the time India became independent, Tamil Nadu has stayed loyal to the core values underpinning our Constitution. In that order is important: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. This, I think, is an important generalization that I will offer. I think it will hold for the whole period of 75 years. Without understanding this, there may have been some slippages, there may be having some deviations. It's impossible for any country not to go through those setback deviations and so on. But as a generalization, we have to affirm the fact that we cannot understand Tamil Nadu's successes and advanced status among Indian states without understanding the shared values, the fact that these values have been seriously and substantively shared from over this whole period. I'm not making any, it doesn't imply any negative comment on other states, but relatively speaking, I think we have done very well. Yeah, this is not to be chauvinistic. This is not to make exaggerated claims, but I think you can show there's quite a literature on this subject that this is one of their strengths. Now, let's turn to politics without getting into any controversial area. The fact is that the Gravidian movement, or what is called the Gravidian movement, has dominated the state's politics since 1967. 55 years and counting. And they're going pretty strong. No All India political party has had a look-in at ruling the state since 1967. Is this significant or not? I think it is. I think it's very significant. All India parties have had a role, whether it's the Congress or the BJP or the smaller parties, which also have All India visions, like the left parties. But I'm talking largely about the two major political parties at the All India level. They have had a role, even a significant role, at times, because they've been in power at the center, and also there have been coalitions. But they have always been junior partners in coalitions in the state. And they have not had any role in government since 1967 at the state level. As a journalist, I've been quite critical of some of the policies of the Gravidian movement parties from time to time. But I'm also aware of the strengths and advantages of this kind of political mobilization or political development based on what is usually called populist mobilization, mass-based mobilization. If you see the trajectory of political development for these parties, it started with the DMK largely, concentrated in urban areas, in metropolitan areas, particularly in Madras, that now is Chennai, and then gradually spread. And that spread has been very impressive in rural areas with both the DMK and AIDMK led by MG Ramachandran and Chief Minister and Jayalalitha as well. They spread their wings, they spread their influence to rural areas. And we often say that among women, the AIADMK has had a very strong hold in rural areas, and among in urban areas, it's the DMK and so on. And there is also, there's a gender differentiation as well in political support. I don't have to go into all this, but this highlights the fact of what is called populist mobilization, mass mobilization, and so on. We've also seen the move away from some kind of separatism to advocacy of state rights and state autonomy, on which Dr. Thirumavalavan touched today, that this is the one state where this is held very strongly, state rights and state autonomy. And, some governments have been more insistent on this than others. For example, the DMK, and so on. Now, recently, after 10 years in government for one Gravidian movement party, the AIADMK, another one, the DMK has been voted to power with a decisive majority. I believe they've started well. First, in handling the pandemic. The previous government also made some good contributions to responding to the pandemic situation, because Tamil Nadu, although it had a very high caseload, COVID-19 caseload, handled it, I wouldn't say perfectly. There were deaths here, there were shortages, but compared with the scenes that we saw in the second wave, I think it was handled better. For example, oxygen, when there was a shortage of it, a critical shortage. Also, Tamil Nadu has been hit by natural disasters, floods, earlier and now. And in this year, we had fairly serious floods, and the common perception is it was handled with competence and sensitivity by the government, both by the political leaders and by the administration as well, the bureaucrats. Welfare measures are on track. That was brought out earlier in the presentation, in the lectures by our two political representatives, political leaders, that there's a continuity in these policies, whether it's industrial development or educational schemes and welfare measures in particular, they are on track. And there's been an emphasis on development, all-round development, and solving people's immediate problems. There's also been something very significant, facing up to what could turn out to be a fiscal crisis. So beginnings of fiscal reform, which has been initiated with support from the top, from the Chief Minister, by a very articulate and highly qualified Finance Minister, Dr. Panivel Thiagarajan, who's been one of the most articulate politicians in the country on what needs to be done in the area of finances. So beginnings perhaps of financial reform, owning up to a serious situation, even for a state like Tamil Nadu, which has done well over the longer term. But these, I suggest, are low-hanging fruit, easily plucked for those in power now, and we await deeper governance reforms and financial reforms as well. And they are clearly in store, but we have to see how they develop over the years. It is quite a tough challenge because the demand is very high, mobilization of the people is very high, expectations are extremely high because you have done well. And I think this is the area where we need to watch. And I think without any partisanship, I can say this government has started extremely well. The DMK government headed by Mr. Mukha Stalin. And the previous government, whatever the problems, I think also credit must be given to both the leadership of Chief Minister M.G. Ramachandran as well as Chief Minister Jayalalitha, and of course the towering Gravidian movement figure going back practically to the origins of the political movement, Dr. Kalainar Karunanidhi as well. So there's a phrase in this book which I mentioned, the Gravidian Model, called Gravidian common sense. Gravidian common sense. And it's here. I'll just to quote from this book, Conceptualizing Power and Caste Society. I'm quoting here. We emphasize the primary role played by Dravidian mobilization against upper caste hegemony and its vision of social justice, Samuga Nidhi, in shaping this regime. We highlight the political labor involved in the formation of a historical bloc or a people comprising a range of subaltern groups under Dravidian Tamil non-Brahmin identity against this hegemony. We argue that this mobilization articulated a demand for self-respect and social justice. Self-respect and social justice, which has shaped the development trajectory of the state as political regimes sought to respond to this demand. Social justice was to be secured through a process of inclusive modernization that will undermine the caste-based division of labor. There was an educational scheme brought by former Chief Minister, which became very unpopular because it suggested, whether it was intended or not, that people who are in a certain station in society because of the caste in which they were born could be educated in a particular way and others in a different way, and that was shot down very quickly in Tamil Nadu, and I think that's very significant. So the mobilization thus demanded, I'm quoting again, and sought to ensure equality of opportunity in the expanding modern domain. So this is the definition of what they call Dravidian common sense. And I quote again, their mobilization made visible the contours of caste-based social injustice, constituting in turn what we refer to as Dravidian common sense. What is that? That comprised securing justice through caste-based reservation. Dr. Thirumavalan mentioned that, and also most backward classes within that group. Faith in a productivist ethos. MrMaFoiK-Pandiarajan went into that in some detail. Need for greater state autonomy, that was also mentioned earlier, and forging an inclusive modernity. And this is what Professors Kalayarasan and Professor Vijay Bhaskar call Gravidian common sense. Whether you buy fully into this or not, you have to take note of these constitutive elements of what they call Gravidian common sense. Now, coming to the development trajectory and strategy, there's a great deal of writing on it by scholars, economists in particular, but also others. They study of what they call subnational trajectories of development. The fact is that India has been developing, different states have been developing in different ways. Not surprising given the diversities of India. Also, there are forces working towards common trajectories. But it's not surprising that there has been this unevenness of development. It's true of many large countries, including European countries, but it's quite pronounced in India. And when you see the data on this question, which is gone through in great detail in this book called the Gravidian Model by two writers, two scholars, economists I referred to, Kalayarasan and Vijay Bhaskar. I think they call attention to the fact that amidst this unevenness and these inequalities in terms of development of large states in particular, there are significant development outcomes. There are some states in India which are, in per capita terms, not not better than sub-Saharan Africa, states and some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But there are also a great deal of evidence that there's been that some of our states have gone past what is called the takeoff stage in economic development, going back to Rostow. And Tamil Nadu leads in this respect, leads its development strategy leads in this respect. And there's a great deal of data to substantiate these claims. The question is, what is behind this? These outcomes are pretty clear. Whether you look at per capita income, where Tamil Nadu's progress has been extremely impressive. Although Dr. Tyagarajan, the finance minister, warned that there could be some slowing down if you don't watch out. And productive capacities. I think net, this kind of development has contributed to improving capabilities, going back to the approach of Professor Amartya Sen, who's given us some wonderful thoughts and works, co-authored with the economist Jean Dress, who lives in India, who's also on the Chief Minister's Advisory Group, one of the economists who's been brought in, interestingly, Jean Dress, that is. But the idea that it cannot be top down, cannot be trickle down. You have to build capabilities by opening up social opportunities in the area of education, by doing better in healthcare, by involving people through decentralization. So the idea that capabilities have to be developed, and that's the way, that's the route to development. Better development, I think, is an important idea, and Tamil Nadu's experience, although it started from another place, has connected very well with this capabilities approach. And this, I think, is important. A democratization of economic opportunities that has made broad-based growth possible, even as interventions in social sectors reinforce the former. This is a point made in this book on the Gravidian Model. There's been significant poverty reduction. There have been better outcomes on food. Here, it is widely recognized that along with Kerala, Tamil Nadu operates the best public distribution system in the country, possibly the very best, because it is universal. It's a universal public distribution system. Many other states have gone for targeted, but Tamil Nadu does this. There is also monitoring of it on a very, in a very efficient way. What the stocks are in different places, if there is, and it's a very responsive system so far as the public distribution system is concerned. There are problems with it. I'll come to it later because we can't get away from that as well. But this has helped. In the midday meal scheme for school children, Tamil Nadu is celebrated as a pioneer. It started in some way with the contribution made by Chief Minister Kamaraj, but it took off with a big initiative from the AIADMK government led by Chief Minister M.G. Ramachandran, who gave it practicality in this, invested in it fully, and it has been improved by every government that has followed, including, of course, the DMK government headed by Chief Minister Karunanidhi. And it continues to be a strong thing. It's part of this Gravidian common sense, if you like. Yeah. And the MR and Rega, the rural employment, it's made a real difference. It's improved wage rates. It's It's even led to labor shortages. It's invited migrants from other states, Bihar, Orissa, and various other states who come here, and so on. It's empowered people. So this, I think, is very important. The development experience of India, despite our strengths, we were one of the fastest growing economies in the world for 15 years, but that slowed down and has met some setbacks. But the development experience, despite this high growth, has been intriguingly short of potential. It has not delivered. We have to be honest about it. Only then we can attend to these issues and progress even faster and better. This high growth, why is it short of potential on the whole? I'm talking about India as a whole. It has failed to deliver development outcomes comparable to several other developing countries. This is now recognized. As I said, parameters on development for parts of India, we did not name those states, are closer to sub-Saharan Africa, lower than other South Asian countries, including Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was already higher, but Bangladesh more recently caught up. I'm talking about development parameters here. However, as the literature points out, there are regions in India where these outcomes are comparable to that of many Asian economies. And Tamil Nadu is clearly one such region. Of course, Maharashtra is. But Maharashtra and Gujarat, while they've done very well in industrialization and economic growth, lag behind in human development parameters. That's a significant issue that is discussed in this book on the Gravidian Model. So economists who classify Indian states in line, I've already mentioned it, stages of development, point out that states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra have crossed the takeoff stage and entered the maturity stage. Here, new problems will come to the fore when you enter this stage here. In per capita terms, already much higher than most states in India. But more important is to look at, or equally important is to look at human development parameters. Why are they better in Tamil Nadu and Kerala than in other states? And these authors make a controversial or arguable claim that Tamil Nadu has done better than any other state, they claim, with respect to overall industrial development or economic development and human development parameters. They say that Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra perhaps is ahead of Tamil Nadu when it comes to, economic dynamism, industrial development, but it has done worse than Tamil Nadu, both Maharashtra and Gujarat, when it comes to these parameters, human development parameters, where Kerala has done exceptionally well, but Kerala hasn't done as well, they contend or point out with respect to industrialization and overall growth, economic growth. So this is a claim that needs to be looked at closely, critically, whether it holds up in all respects. But it's an interesting claim, which I want you to think about. How does political mobilization against caste hierarchies lead to better development outcomes? It's an interesting question. And these two authors contend that while a distinct set of processes root in regional political mobilization against caste hierarchies played an important role in the development outcomes in the state, the processes underway at the regional level, they also, I think, relate to larger issues of capital accumulation and national and global processes of development. And this, I think, is an important claim. It's clear that during this period of reform, post-early 90s, the western region and the southern region have grown at a much faster rate than the rest of the country. And pitting one state against another in terms of competitiveness, rivalry even, has become very common, particularly after the state rankings began to be published in magazines and newspapers. And for example, Chandrababu Naidu's Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat in the 2000s, so on. This is an exercise which perhaps has fueled this rivalry or competitiveness, which on the whole may not be a bad thing. I mentioned that Professors Amartya Sen and Jean Dress have made a powerful case for a capability-centered development path where investments in human capabilities should be prioritized. Then they can translate into economic development. And that development is likely to be more inclusive. And there's quite a literature on this question, supporting the Tamil Nadu's claim as one of the states that has done extremely well on the whole. The question of what explains this success is a hard one. The answers can't be simplistic. But the basic answer that the explanation lies in the distinctive way that power and social justice were conceptualized by populist Gravidian mobilization in Tamil Nadu. That I think has some appeal. And the fact that this higher growth rate has been consistent over a significant period, the post-reform period, I think is also an impressive part of the reality that we are living through. In the 1960s, Tamil Nadu had higher poverty levels, I mentioned this already, than the national average, although it had a higher per capita income than the national average. Its income has risen in comparative terms. This is from the book I mentioned, the Gravidian Model. In the 1960s, Tamil Nadu had a per capita income twice that of Bihar. That has gone up 4 times in the 2010s, and it's gone up even higher perhaps since. So, while Tamil Nadu had a per capita income only marginally higher by some 14% over the All India average in the 1960s, it has gone up to 155% of the All India average by the 2010s, and perhaps it has gone up higher in the last few years. And as this book points out, it stood 4th among 12 large states in the 1960s, 3rd in 1990, 2nd in 2014, and today, according to the India Today rankings, the best performing state among all the big states in the country. And although its per capita income stands lower than Maharashtra's and marginally less than Gujarat's, I heard that it's become number 2 already. Perhaps the latest data show that its development performance is clearly very much better overall than those 2 big states. The other significant factor, I think Mr. Pandiarajan touched on this, has been this increase in per capita income has been accompanied by a structural transformation. This is a point that these 2 authors of the Gravidian Model emphasize, a structural transformation of a degree higher than any other major state in the country. It has the 2nd lowest share of population dependent on agriculture. Agriculture constitutes less than 8% of the state's income, according to the data available in the book, which is less than half the All India average. Tamil Nadu has the highest share of workers in manufacturing. Mr. Pandiarajan has already told us how it has built a vibrant manufacturing base, although there are some deficits there also. He talked about it. But the good thing about this vibrant manufacturing base is it responds to the employment question, which is a question that is yet to be addressed, whether it's in developed countries or developing countries, satisfactorily. that people are being made fail. They are redundant. Getting jobs is not easy unless you happen to be in your area, the San Francisco Bay Area, perhaps, where there's a great demand for these capabilities represented by the Tamil Manram here, as well as other communities in the US and elsewhere. But Tamil Nadu's strong industrial base, manufacturing base rather, has a particular characteristic. It's strong in labor-intensive sectors, textiles, garments, leather goods, automobile manufacturing, automobile component manufacturing. And the data are very strong. I don't have to go into it. If there's interest later, we can look at that, even after this webinar. Tamil Nadu has also mobilized foreign capital well, foreign investment. And the Sri Perumbudur industrial cluster is a very good example, but you also have other areas. And major corporates, global players have come in, whether you talk about earlier Nokia, Samsung, Dell, Motorola, Foxconn, and the big automobile names, Hyundai, Ford, Daimler-Benz, Yamaha, BMW, Mitsubishi. And Tamil Nadu is now Chennai. The Chennai area, Kanchipuram area is now being called the Detroit of India, and so on. It has a huge share of automobile component manufacturing. Tamil Nadu is clearly behind Karnataka when it comes to vibrant software and so on, but it's improved its position in this area as well as in medical and educational service industries. Mr. Pandiarajan, I think, touched on the idea of the spatial dimension of industrialization. This is also a natural advantage developed over time. The relatively even distribution of development nodes or centers across the area, industrial regions. It's quite spread out, reasonably evenly distributed. If you look at the censuses, Tamil Nadu would come out as the major state with the largest number of towns, what are classified in the census of India as towns. So it gives you a certain advantage. It's not all concentrated in one or two metropolitan areas. So I think these are advantages, partly developed over time, but partly also deliberately built upon. And there's been also agricultural commercial-based entrepreneurship. So looking at various indicators of what is known as public governance, along with Kerala, Tamil Nadu is usually ranked right at the top, or at least the top 5 states, when they use indicators such as infrastructure, social service delivery, fiscal performance, law and order, judicial service delivery, and quality of legislature. I've given you a very bright picture of what has happened. Now let's look at 2 other realities which help us get a more balanced view of what we are talking about. One is the challenge of fiscal deficits and revenue deficits. Finances in bad shape. That's the message that came out through the white paper. Quite a unique thing. I think very few other states have done something in depth like this, brought out by the Tamil Nadu government and spearheaded by Finance Minister Dr. PTR. I just want to remind you, he spoke of the need for bold, once-in-a-generation reforms to put the state's finances back on track, argued that a business-as-usual approach won't do, said that the fiscal situation of the state is in dire circumstances. This is from the white paper, in part due to extraneous circumstances, but in substantial measure due to structural flaws in governance. Note that phrase in the white paper, structural flaws in governance. which have not been rectified in a timely manner. He's not pointed the finger at any particular government and so on in this white paper, but I think it's clear that over time, this problem has been allowed to accumulate. Some extraneous circumstances, including the COVID-19 pandemic, but in substantial measure, to quote from the white paper, due to structural flaws in governance and the failure to rectify these flaws in a timely manner. And then the white paper points out that the COVID pandemic has greatly exacerbated the situation, highlighted how vulnerable Tamil Nadu currently is. There are no buffers left, I'm quoting still, no fiscal headroom that will allow for delay. But he says, the white paper says, the decline is reversible and the commitments made to the people remain. You harvested or plucked the low-hanging fruit. The time has come for deeper reform, and we will see how this unfolds over the next year or two, and so on. I don't want to get into the details here because we're running out of time about revenue deficit and fiscal deficit, but there is clear evidence that it has worsened more than for many other major states in the most recent period. The second challenge, we cannot escape from this, is corruption, what economists call rent-seeking, systematized corruption. I'll discuss this very briefly. I think there is evidence that there are distinctive corruption systems in different states with well-established patterns, expertly formulated and enforced rules of the game, identifiable actors, regional and local specificities. And Tamil Nadu, let's be blunt about it, has developed a signature corruption system, the software for which has been repeatedly updated and upgraded and aggressively protected over the past 3.5 decades. The OS, the system software that manages the hardware and software resources and provides common services for the statewide corruption activities, has been proved to be virtually ineradicable. This is usually called by economists. I did a book a couple of years ago called Why Scams Are Here to Stay. And there's a chapter on Tamil Nadu. Those interested can look at that and other material as well, because this is no longer a secret. And of course, it's also connected with politics, political mobilization, the need to fund elections, the need that the spending limits for elections are unrealistically low, and so on. You can rationalize this in many ways. You can also say that corruption sometimes goes hand in hand with development. But the fact is that, and I think the white paper has hinted at this, the revenues have been pretty good, whether you talk about sand mining, river sand mining, beach sand mining, granite quarrying, the wholesale and retail, the TASMAC system. The revenues have been very impressive, but have all the revenues gone into where they should be? Have they been properly accounted? Has there been siphoning off? These are questions that are before us, have been raised publicly, and it remains to be seen how this is going to be tackled. I'm not talking here about any political party or system. I avoid that here, but this is a reality that has to be faced. And this is one of the obstacles to further development in the state. And I don't think any politician speaking privately is going to deny the fact that any serious politician or student of politics or journalist is going to seriously contest the fact that this is an obstacle to development. It's not good for us. It's not good for India. It's not good for many states. Other states also face huge problems. When you talk about vote buying, for example, so on. But these are areas that need to be tackled. But coming back to the bright side, that is what we need to take away from this webinar. I think Tamil Nadu's contribution to India's development post-independence has been impressive, has been many-sided, has been based on self-respect and social justice, whatever the deficits, whatever the misses or the slippages, and political and this mass mobilization, what is called populist mobilization, based on doing away or reducing caste-based inequalities, that has contributed in a significant way to this development. And on the whole, we can say that while we celebrate 75 years of independence after a glorious freedom struggle, and while we have adopted an excellent constitution with noble values, committed to equality, committed to justice, committed to liberty, committed to fraternity, where there's no place for religious division or division on any lines, ethnic, linguistic, and so on, not to mention, and of course religious, communal. While all this is so, I think Tamil Nadu's contribution here, net, can be considered magnificent, and we can be proud to be part of this experience. And I commend the San Francisco Bay Area Tamil Manram for doing us proud through this webinar. And I wish you every success, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.